Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Corporate Scrutiny and Governance Overview and Scrutiny Board. Friday night special. Yep. First of all, item 1 is apologies. Which got Councillor Carr. Anyone else? No? Okay. Councillor 2, late items, nothing from me. Item 3, declarations of interest. I think we all have a bit of an interest, as always, but yes, I think there's a certain element of that.
So I presume there's going to be a discussion?
Yes, there is. Yes.
Yeah. Or it's a really, really short meeting, right? Okay. Item 4 is the procedures of the call-in. We should all be fairly familiar with this by now, but just in case you're not, I'll just run through how we're going to run this evening's meeting. The proposers of the call-in will all get an opportunity to speak initially. This isn't a time-limited amount, but I would just encourage everyone to be to the point and just avoid sort of repetition, deviation, normal rules apply. And I'll just try and bring you in if you're sort of straying off from that. Similarly, and then we as board members get an opportunity to question the proposers, any questions or any clarifications we wish to have. And then it's over to the cabinet member, or in this case, the stand-in leader of the council, Councillor Banwaite, will get an unlimited amount of time to respond to the call-in. And then, once again, us as board members question Councillor Banwaite. And then it is a summing up by one of the proposers, gets 5 minutes maximum. 5 minutes maximum for Councillor Banwaite. And then it's over to us, board members. We are invited to make a contribution, and within that contribution decide, give our sort of decision whether we want to uphold or reject the call-in. Any questions at that stage? Okay, then without further ado, it is the call-in, item 5 is call-in of Council Cabinet Decision 179/15. So who would like to go first? Councillor Ringall.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for explaining the rules again. I was rather disappointed to read this report, and I've come up with a few things. There's no clear policy trail as to what officers will do, and no indication of non-priority wards with access to council services. All we're going to get now is advice from council. Are we just abandoning these wards? I don't know. So the next one is there's no other options considered. You've only considered totally abandoning all neighbourhood working or this model. You haven't said there's no opinion of proportionality or recognising the needs of all 17 wards. We all have pavements that need replacing, which this money used to help with. We all have school parking issues outside every school across the city. So I'm not sure where the proportionality is fair in that. And the last one I want to raise is that the policy commenced on the 1st of April, yet all officers are still in place anyway. You've got to give a minimum of 12 weeks notice. I just feel that it's not proportional. You're still, what's the words I'm looking for? You've still got the officers there. I don't understand why we can't just all have the same amount across the whole, all 17 wards. That's me. Thank you, Chair.
Who's next? Councillor Harwood. Thank you, Councillor Hold. Councillor Hassel.
Thanks, Chair. I think I want to point out that I believe this authority has a duty to all residents, not a select few. You've identified that neighbourhood funding is to enable wards to be safe and clean. Surely all areas should be afforded this, and that expectation should be fulfilled. I feel there's been a lack of clarity in illustrating the way this decision has been arrived at. There's been nothing in the way of stats or supporting information in council papers. In fact, there's not even been a link to the index of deprivation to which you refer to. And this index, I'd just like to briefly mention a few points on from the guidance notes contained within the index. It's worked out by subdividing the whole country into 32,844 areas. These are called super output areas or neighbourhoods, which I think is a far better name. One being the most deprived and the higher number being the least. There are 7 areas taken into account when working out this figure. They cover the areas of income deprivation, employment deprivation, education and skills, health and disability, crime, barriers to housing and living environment deprivation. I'm not sure how far neighbourhood funding goes towards tackling those specific issues. The index also highlights that it cannot be compared to previous indices. They are not backwards compatible. So I'm unsure how you can tell or gauge how effective measures you are putting in place in neighbourhoods that will get funding is working. And I think finally, just to go over the points that it raises, is that this index shows deprivation only, not affluence. So it is not that one area is more affluent than another, it's more deprived than another. And I think it highlights that there is deprivation in all wards of the city. Because there has been no kind of clarity or supporting information with the index to show how you've worked it out, I've looked into it myself, and I think, and I can only assume this, by your own workings out, the wards that fall within the bracket of receiving funding fall within the 40% deprivation bracket. However, from that limit that you've self-imposed, because there is no limit that highlights how a deprived area is, you know, on what level you should look to address deprivation at what percentage level. Because of the subdivided areas within each ward, which these small neighbourhoods, which are roughly about 1,500 residents per neighbourhood. So each ward is subdivided into these smaller areas, and that's where each area is highlighted on this index map, which everyone is free to have a look at if you wish. I think this is the easiest way to view the city as a whole from this index. From this self-imposed 40% bracket, you have inadvertently left areas within wards that will not receive any funding that fall within that 40% bracket and below. There are at least 3 areas within Chellaston Ward, and there is 1 area in Oakwood that actually falls within the 20% deprivation bracket in the country, not in the city, in the country. So therefore, I think you have somewhat overlooked the people who you purport to be trying to help in areas where you offer no help at all. I think within my own ward of Allestree, our neighbourhood funding has been cut by some 95%. And although it's very limited, we have made that amount go a long way, particularly towards funding the local youth group, which I think is an essential kind of thing for young kids to get to. This will have to stop with the ceasing of our ward funding. And I don't think, you and I certainly don't, think kids in Allestree have lesser need for this facility than anywhere else in the city. I don't think there's any need to go back to the drawing board and start again. There was a system in place where fair and equal funding was given across the city, and I would hope that that would be looked at to go back and address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hassel. Now the board members have opportunity to ask any questions they wish to of the proposers of the call-in. Councillor Webb.
Can I ask, nobody's mentioned on the call-in the local area coordinators. Are members who've put in the call-in aware of local area coordination and their allocation across the city? This board has recommended to Cabinet that all 17 wards get the local area coordinators, and that should be an aim for Cabinet. Would this, in your opinion, offset? Would this, in your opinion, offset any loss in neighbourhood funding or officer time?
Who would like to say yes to Roy?
Thank you, Roy. I was at the same meeting as you were about the local area workers. They actually do a totally different job. There's only going to be 10 across the city, and Chellaston doesn't get one, and I don't believe Oakwood does, and I don't believe Allestree does. But it is a totally different level of working anyway. It's extremely low level, so it wouldn't make any difference. But again, we're still not covered under that anyway.
Poulter.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just your thoughts on this subject, in that in the last year, the wards have received various amounts of devolved funding, and I believe wards like Micklehove, Allestree, Chellaston, Oakwood have received quite a small amount of devolved funding, both in terms of community grants and in street pride terms. In terms of helping to get the local community to engage and the use of that small amount of money, how useful was that this past year, and how useful would that be on an ongoing basis?
Thank you, Chris. It's very difficult, as we all know as ward councillors, to get the public involved. And if there is a pot of money available where groups can get and use it, it makes it a lot easier. I think we'd all agree with that. So, yes, having the money limited as it was still went an incredibly long way. And it does do some really good things. It doesn't just have to buy, you know, cricket shields for places in Swarkston. Thank you.
Okay. Wasn't entirely relevant, that piece.
I'd like to follow that.
Councillor Harwood, and then I'm going to move on, because I don't think the questions are really about the substantial nature of the
you know, any money is very useful, no matter what it is. I mean, Allestree had a small amount of money, and they've already said it went quite a long way. The fact is, you're involving the residents, no matter how much money is. And you'll be surprised, really, on our website, the council's website in Oakwood, things like benches that we put in was, we had a lot of it from residents. And people stopped you in the street and say, can you do this, can you do that? It'd be nice to be able to say, yes, we can, or we do what we can, with no funding whatsoever. What can we say to them? It's very unfair.
Yeah, I agree.
Councillor Bayliss, did you want to ask a question really about the call-in?
Yeah, I did actually, if that's okay, Chair. I've heard them articulate some better than others about they think it's disproportionate, but could they tell me if this is sent back to Cabinet, what they would see and like to see as an outcome, just out of interest?
I think we've already said this, really. It's fair and equal funding across all 17 wards. That's what we're asking for.
Now, so my understanding of this is that no one's getting any funding. Everyone's getting nothing. Like, some people are getting some resource, admittedly, but that doesn't really. So I agree with you, Frank. It is good to tell residents that yes, we can. But for instance, our youth provision, which we funded through our board, additionally, that's being cut as well. I mean, so all wards are losing their funding. It's just not all are losing all of their neighbourhood officer time. Councillor Harwood.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've made the point, Chair. What we would like is equal basis throughout the city. If, whatever, Derwent or Chadderton are getting a neighbourhood officer, or all for one, as somebody has said, I want that in Oakwood as well. I want somebody to be able to go to and talk about. I understand what the situation is. I'm not naive. But what I do want is fair play for the residents of Oakwood. That's what I want, and no more than that.
We shall now move on to Councillor Banway for your response to the call-in. As I said, it's not time limited, but brevity is a virtue.
I want to be quick. My wife's making salmon and vegetables, so I hope to be back by half past, but it will take as long as it needs to, Chair. Chair, I think, unfortunately, I have to put this into context yet again, and that is government policy is austerity. And what that basically means is government have made it absolutely clear that they are cutting public funding. Local government has been hit the hardest. In Derby's case, and comparably to local government in general, that's a 40% reduction overall. So the cuts we've had to implement since 2010 and the remaining savings we have to make, this council will shrink by 40%. So government policy is for us to cut our cloth accordingly, and that's exactly obviously what we've had to do since 2010. We've already made savings of £116 million. I mean, that's an extraordinary figure. We have another £45 million savings to make. So the context of this particular issue is, as per the budget consultation that we've undertaken and the budget that's just been set, this is part of that. So this goes towards the £45 million savings. In other words, this is a small but significant decision we've had to make to balance our books. So we have been able to report back to government that we do balance, and you've got to bear in mind, in September I led a delegation down to government because we were in an extremely precarious position.
Yeah, Chair, can I just raise a point of order? The applicants have stuck to the point, and the principles in the call-in. So far, Councillor Banway's
Councillor Poulter, the questioners didn't. I've given everyone a little bit of licence. It's Friday night. Do please try and get back to the point of the call-in. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 principles that believe to be reached. If we can refer to those principles, and we'll get back to
actually,
it.
but
yeah,
thank you, Chair.
Chair, this is all part. We've made decisions as part of the budget. And we've had to set a budget which is a reflection on the grant we get from government. So you can't talk about this issue and not put it into context at all, Chair. And it's absolutely relevant that people understand why we're making this decision. And so, Chair...
Absolutely, Ranjit. It's just simply that I think the people in this room are acutely aware of that. And
it doesn't sound like it, Chair, at all.
Okay.
And I come on to this point and if we look at two aspects which have been referred to. Firstly, I think there's a real confusion about the call-in. We've talked about neighbourhood funding. Well, in terms of proportionality, as you said rightly, we've cut neighbourhood funding, or should I say suspended it, across all wards. So going forward, no ward will get a devolved set of funding, as we have done historically. And that's because, again, obviously it's gone towards our savings target. So £570,000 has been saved, and no ward would get any devolved funding. And that's an important point. So those councillors that say, well, that's not fair, I agree with them, it's not fair. I wish we didn't have to do that. But the reality is, we've put that saving to report back to government that we've balanced the books. Obviously, during the budget consultation, no alternative was put by anybody else about how that could be restored. There were no amendments around devolved funding. And you'll recall the contributions made during the overview and scrutiny meetings made no reference to this. So it's taken me by very much surprise the comments now being made. So, you know, do we wish we could put that devolved funding back? I wish we could. But that's, you know, that obviously is something we need to talk about in the future about the various campaigning we do to secure fair funding. So we've saved £570,000. So I don't recognise that in terms of the first point about proportionality, the devolved funding aspect just simply is not relevant. This issue in terms of proportionality refers to, I would say, about the remaining neighbourhood management. That's the allocation of officers. Now, as you recall, Chair, it was a commitment of this administration to introduce neighbourhood management, and I actually led on it. It was my baby, if I could put it that way, Chair. So we've introduced a structure which saw neighbourhood officers, you know, to support all areas of the city, and I was keen to make sure that happened, that, you know, everybody got an opportunity to be supported. But the reality is, again, we've had to cut our cloth accordingly, and what we've tried to do is to, almost like a collapsing bag, we've tried to say, look, how can we keep the integrity of neighbourhood management in these difficult times, to sustain it going forward, certainly during the course of the current savings target that government have left us, and then hopefully in the future we could then build it back. Because the alternative could have been to completely cut it all together. So what we've done is, obviously, I think the reasonable way to do it is to look at the government's own indices of multiple deprivation, and that is the very formula that government uses nationally. All sorts of funding is allocated, you know, whether it's, you know, formula grants or, you know, European funding. So we've used a legal, robust, government-recommended formula to prioritise the remaining resources. And based upon that, based upon the fact we've got 6 officers, the current funding we've got remaining enables us to have 6 officers and 2 managers. We've come up with a way of sharing them between wards. So in terms of proportionality, I think that's very robust. We've explained what that is. It's a very formula that we used previously when we devolved funding based upon, obviously, you know, the same formula, which obviously saw, you know, certain wards, you know, get more money than others. So in this case, obviously, Arboreton secured a bigger share of the funding than Alistry. And again, you know, we use the same formula about that. So moving on from proportionality about due consultation, well, we have consulted. We've consulted with cabinet members, senior officers, the neighbourhood staff. Consultation has also taken place with key partners, Derby Homes, because a number of those officers are seconded from Derby Homes. And I also want to make the point, Chair, we've consulted the public. This was a manifesto commitment of Labour in 2012. We were elected to deliver that, and I mentioned early on that we did deliver it. So, you know, there's nothing more stronger mandate than that afforded to us by the public. And so, you know, again, I don't accept the fact that we haven't carried out appropriate consultation, Chair. In terms of moving on, clarity of aims and desired outcomes, I think that's quite clear in the paper. Obviously, you could go into more detail, more structured detail about day to day or hour to hour. But again, the concept of neighbourhood working has been quite fluid. You know, it's been the allocation of neighbourhood officers so that councillors can work with them to identify, you know, issues, to develop a plan which is unique to that ward. I think it would be wholly wrong for let's say in my case in Bolton as a councillor to you know, to impose our way of working on Alveston, for example. You know, the councillors have different styles, they have, you know, different ways of working, their priorities and issues will be different, and so the same will be in Normanton and other parts of across the city. So it's not been a micromanaged approach, it's very much been a you know, a mature way of working with mature people, very professionals, and councillors to kind of to work with them in that way. And in terms of a structure of a week, I think we've been absolutely clear that on one day we'd expect the neighbourhood officer to be working in one ward, and the other day they'd obviously work in the other ward, and then 3 days they'll be available as part of a central team. And that's a very important point, because it will come on to, I think, quite nicely this sense that we'll be neglecting those areas that haven't got a dedicated neighbourhood officer. In fact, by pooling the neighbourhood officers together for 3 days a week, they can be used in any part of the city. So again, as we've been working the last couple of years, we through the head of service and through the cabinet member, and we set up a neighbourhood board, which is chaired by the cabinet member, supported by the head of service and supported by various partners like the police and Derby Homes. We put a process in place that councillors that needed additional support could actually make representations through the neighbourhood manager. So if you're in Chellaston and God forbid there was a serious incident, of antisocial behaviour that warranted additional support, it's a simple email to the cabinet member of the neighbourhood or to the head of service, would warrant then the support to be made available. So there's no bureaucracy around that, or even a simple phone call to say, look, this incident's happened, we need support. I think within a matter of an hour, as long as it's during daytime time, those resources will be made available. So there's nothing stopping for a team of neighbourhood officers going into Oakwood and going into Chellaston, Chair. And I come back to this point again, that was exactly as per the guidelines that I introduced. And I circulated a set of guidelines, back when I first launched neighbourhood management back in 2013-14, Chair. In terms of other options, what other options were considered? Well, the other option was to cut it completely. That is the future of actually neighbourhood management. That's the future of discretionary services. We've been absolutely clear on that. That's why I went down to London to meet the Minister. Because, for the savings targets that we've got to make, we're seeing a wipeout of our discretionary services. And this is a service, as I said, Chair, that I'm a big supporter of. It was my brainchild. I'm a big believer in it. And so the other option would have been to cut it completely. So in other words, to get rid of whole of neighbourhood management, get rid of all those neighbourhood officers. Fortunately, sadly, some of them would have lost their jobs. Some of them hopefully would have gone on to find other employment within the council. But again, that was not an option for this administration, because we believe in neighbourhood management. We believe in supporting our councillors on the ground. We believe in providing a level of service as much as we can, and at the same time doing the job that government have asked us, which is to cut our cloth accordingly, Chair. So simply wiping out neighbourhood management wasn't in our interest. But I come back to this point again. On paper, neighbourhood management is set to go. The next course of the next 3 years, to balance the books, on paper, the budget we've consulted on, neighbourhood management goes. Unless we find a way collectively, working together, to restore funding that's what's going to pay for it. I mean, you can't live in denial about what funds council services. You can't support austerity nationally, then come up with a ludicrous argument and complain about cuts locally. That just does not make sense. Just listen to yourself.
Thank you, Ranjit. I think you've covered all the points on there.
So, Chair, I think there's just one point about the savings will not be achieved within the timescales. Of course, once you set a budget, Chair, you want to kind of realise the savings as quick as possible. But it's not as simple as that, especially when you're reducing services and consultation is required. You've got to go through a statutory process. Obviously, in this case, it wasn't a simple case of, cutting it completely. What we've tried to do is to retain the service. So clearly, during that period from setting the budget, lengthy consultations and discussions were taking place behind the scenes to get to the stage where we are, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, this question is from board members. I've got one first. You did just touch on it. So I just wanted to clarify that that central resource will be proportioned and be available on a basis of need, even to the non-priority wards, as it were. And secondly to that is, obviously, as a follow-up from that, then that allocation and obviously the outcome of that, although it will only be a small allocation, presumably the performance of that will be measured as with anything else in this council, and that will be scrutinised along with everything else on the boards.
Yes, Chair. The head of neighbourhood management and the neighbourhood officers it will be delegated to them. You know, they'll be allowed to use their discretion. So, you know, that's not something, you know, I would control. If there was an issue on the ground that warranted that support, they can go direct to the neighbourhood, the head of service, and those resources will be made available. Chair, it doesn't need to go back to cabinet, you know, and they are, as you said, available to be scrutinised. For those 3 days, that team, we'd expect them to be working on the ground across the city in priority areas on priority issues, irrespective of the neighbourhood. Chair.
I was wondering where this was made clear in any of the reports that we've had before us, because as far as I understand it, there would be advice available, and that would be it to non-priority wards. So it's interesting to hear this, but it also reinforces the clarity of AIM's call-in process, which says it fails to identify roles and responsibilities of officers, because there's nowhere in this report that makes it clear that non-priority wards have a call on this service. So can you explain that, please?
I believe the question was if that resource is available to other wards. Councillor Webb, really has to be a question.
It is a question. From exactly what you were talking about, it was an absolute question. It ended with a question mark at the end of it.
The question is simple. If Councillor Banway is saying that the non-priority wards will have an allocation of service, not advice, then why isn't it not made clear in the reports that we have before us? Because there is no clarity on this, and you know, much as I would like to take Councillor Banwaite's word, I need something in black and white so that I could go back to residents and say, look, here's the clarity of AIMS.
Chair, it is in black and white. It's on page 4, and I quote, it's the last bullet point, just above 4.6. Non-priority neighbourhoods will still be offered an advisory service from the neighbourhood team that will benefit, and this is the key point, from the citywide services in community safety and cohesion and integration. So, I mean, that just makes it clear that, you know, the neighbour, when you talk about allocation, the neighbourhood officers are specifically allocated to certain wards, and they will work in those priority wards on set days. So, for example, I'm going to use Bolton and Alveston's case. So we will have a neighbourhood officer, which we will have, you know, we'll work in one day, or let's say on Monday in Bolton, and Tuesday in Alveston, and then for the other 3 days, they'll all come together as one team, and they will look at across the city. Obviously, if you know, they'll obviously liaise with those councillors, those wards, to see what the issues are, and you know, if it warrants going out there and supporting them, that will be done. There's no kind of ceremony around that, Chair. Obviously, you know, it's a two-way process. We'd expect the wards to come in and work with us. But can I just say for the record also, when we first launched neighbourhood management, certain wards didn't cooperate with the process at all. They showed no interest of I
think you've
working.
answered the question. So, Councillor Banway, you've answered the question. Thank you. Okay. Councillor Poulter.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of points. Ranjit, in terms of proportionality for starters, no matter how you dress it up, at the end of the day, there will be a disproportionate effect on some wards in the city. Some wards in the city will have no support from council officers to help them engage with the community by way of facilitating forums or boards. And that's in black and white. The policy states that certain wards will not get the support necessary to help them to properly engage with their communities. How can that be proportionate?
Councillor Banway.
Okay, Chair, so just not to confuse things, so we're not talking about neighbourhood devolved funding here. We're not talking about now the allocation of neighbourhood officers and neighbourhood manager. What we're talking about is a support, as Councillor Poulter, he has identified an area there. Yes, absolutely, it is. Come back to the same issue again. Will there be a neighbourhood manager for, let's say, Shelliston or Oakwood to set up, boards or forums? No, there won't. Okay. The reference I made earlier on to support from officers, that was around community cohesion, crime and antisocial behaviour. So, for example, the incident I referred to, if there was an antisocial behaviour issue that required, boots on the ground to support those local councillors, to work closely with the police and neighbourhood watch groups, that's where the neighbourhood officers would come in. That is available. But in terms of resources to help boards and forums to set up, that will not exist for those, for those wards, obviously, Chelliston, Oakwood, Littlehaven, Micklehove and Allestree. Just as they will not exist in 3 years' time for the rest of the city, because they will completely be gone altogether. Neighbourhood management will not exist. So again, what we've tried to do is cut our cloth accordingly. I think there's an exciting opportunity here for those for the wards of that I've quoted to see how you can take neighbourhood management going forward without the resources, because we're all facing that. And actually, I think in those wards that will still get an neighbourhood manager and officer, in fact, we are going to be looking ahead at the future and saying, let's not take this for granted. We are going to start that work now to say, how can we create capacity in those communities? Because one day, those resources will come to an end. So how can we continue to sustain community initiatives like Citizens on Patrol, run forums, and I'm very optimistic that we can still do that. The partners are out there, whether you run them in the local Derby Homes, resident association office. But that is an intriguing question. But I think the answer's there. I think neighbourhood management in itself evolved long before devolved funding and budgets existed. It was a simple concept of councillors,
I think we've covered that one, Ranjit.
Okay.
Did you have another point,
Thank you.
Poulter?
I take it that an acceptance there then that there will be a disproportionate service to some areas of the city in relation to that. The next point was in relation to consultation, and Councillor Banwaite points to the fact that there was mention of some proposed changes to the neighbourhood workings in the budget. Well, there was, but there was no mention of the fact that they were considering not providing any service other than advice to some wards, or there was actually no mention or confirmation that they intended to remove all the funding to all the wards. It was certainly considered, the budget proposal was also certainly considered by my neighbourhood board, and highlighted the potentially devastating effects of losing all the funding, for example, losing any youth services in Spondon. So in terms of consultation, the detail in the budget was absolutely minimal. In my view, the detail in this report is still minimal. It absolutely does not spell out what will happen. And so in my view, the consultation was and has been flawed in that no members, no board members, no forums have had the opportunity to comment on the fact that they will no longer have funding, or in some cases have any support for forums and boards. So, would you not agree, Councillor Banwaite, that the consultation is therefore flawed?
Councillor Banwaite, do you agree?
No, Chair, I don't agree. And
I think that's the answer to the question.
Well, let me just identify the evidence for that. I mean, if you look at the budget consultation, which we undertook as part of the statutory requirement, it makes it absolutely clear on page 51, on the second to last paragraph. There's a whole section about the future of neighbourhood working, and I pick out one key sentence. It talks about, it is proposed to reconfigure this service in 2016 to make an overall saving of £917,000. This will see the ceasing of neighbourhood management function and suspension of devolved funding, including the ending of officer support for neighbourhood boards and forums, where they still exist. So that's been out to consultation. So the opportunity for you, for the boards and the forums to talk about it, to make representations at the overview and scrutiny meeting that was held to look at the budget. As I said, no contributions were made from you or your group or other councillors, or even the budget, the actual full council meeting that set the budget. Nobody talked about this. To simply come here now and say that this didn't exist is, you clearly haven't read this document, or I don't know where you've been.
Thank you, Councillor Banwaite. Councillor Poulter, have you got another question?
I take it that Councillor Banwaite doesn't accept that the information consulted on was insufficient, which is my view. Returning to the points, In terms of options considered, it makes it clear in the note from Cabinet the options considered, and one was to end all services, and the other was to maintain the existing level of services. Well, in my view, those options are flawed in that there are other potential options. At the end of the day, we've heard from the respondees tonight about the value of even a small amount of money and its effect and its ability to encourage and engage local communities. In my view, one option that should have been considered, and I will propose should be considered by the Cabinet.
Councillor Poulter, would other options? So for the call-in, it is a record of what options were considered and given the reasons for the decision.
Yeah.
I mean, on this particular point, we were given options that were considered.
Yeah, but the point is...
the point is not alternative options. The point is that they were considered. Whether we like the options or think there should have been other options, better options or alternatives is not the process this call-in is to look at. It's whether they considered other options. Apparently they did. It's there in the report, and they didn't go with them.
Okay, well, the options that they considered and turned down, but what they've run with is something that's obviously not suitable. Councillor Banway asked earlier on, asked the respondents what he would suggest the council considered to do as an alternative. Yeah, so what I'd like to do is to give him an alternative, because at the end of the day,
this is not the meeting where we propose alternatives or recommendations. This is not what it isn't, Councillor Poulter. It's for us to say whether or not the constitutional obligation to say that other options were considered. They were documented in the report, and I think on this particular point, us offering alternatives at this stage, we allowed the proponents of the call-in to give options, but I really think in a question it's not really suitable. So unless there's a question on this, well, it isn't you proposing not alternative and asking Ranjit to agree.
Let's look at it in another way then. In terms of proportionality, is it proportionate for all wards in the city to receive no devolved funding? In my view, it isn't. What should happen is that because of the proven value of a small amount of funding, then what should happen is for Street Pride has a budget. Street Pride has a budget of over £2.3 million. If £4,000 of that
Councillor Poulter,
budget,
I understand what you're doing here, and it is making some sort of proposition as to what an alternative might be. Save it for the manifesto, because that's not what the call-in's about, is it?
I'm talking to proportionality of the decision.
You're trying to crowbar it into proportionality, which I agree you're doing quite a good job of.
In my view, it's disproportionate.
Disproportionate.
And
it's not disproportionate. We've just said everyone's getting no money. That aspect of it is not disproportionate.
We've been asked, it's been suggested, and it's been asked that nobody's come up with any other alternative ideas. What I'm suggesting here is a proportionate way of dealing with it would be to use some of the Street Pride money, Street Pride funding, a small amount, say £4,000, to each ward, a total of £68,000 across the city, devolved, just to give each ward a very small amount of money to be able to work with. In my view, that would actually save money, because these issues that come up throughout the year aren't going to go away. There will be issues in each ward next year, and rather than dealing with it by the neighbourhood board or forum way,
it's not whether I agree or disagree, Chris. It really is. Had this have been an amendment to the budget, then that's appropriate. Okay. If it's Chair, on the principles of the call-in, doesn't really fit.
Okay, certainly Councillor Banway and yourselves in the past have asked for alternatives. Then, if you don't want to listen to alternatives, then so be it. In relation then to the budget itself, or the saving itself, there's an identified saving on staffing. We know and we've heard that the staffing hasn't been reduced to the level that's proposed in the budget. There's therefore a pressure. By taking this decision, there's a budget pressure being created, because the levels of staffing cannot be reduced, in my understanding, for at least 3 months. So a quarter of the saving that's proposed cannot be made. How is he going to deal with that?
Which part of the call-in is that a question on? Which principle of the call-in?
It's under other relevant issues that do not appear to have been taken into consideration.
Okay, so Councillor Banway, the pressures as the staffing has not been reduced, how are you going to deal with that?
Sorry, Chair, just repeat that again. The pressures of staffing.
I'm not going to repeat it again. Chris, just...
Shall I explain?
Right, so as the staffing has not been reduced and the date of the implementation of the policy has been reached, it has... Councillor Poulter suggests it has created a pressure of staffing. How are you going to deal with that? The report does not tell us.
It doesn't make sense, Chair, because we've balanced the budget. Okay, so the budget is balanced, albeit parts of it on paper, and we've got other decisions we're going to need to take over the course of the next couple of years. In particular, so this is now budget pressure, of course it is, but it's a budget pressure we can afford because we've balanced the budget.
Okay, that's good enough for me. Councillor Webb, not your next.
Sorry,
and then it's Councillor Hardle.
It's not good for me.
Sorry?
It's not a good answer for me.
I know, but I'm sat here. And it's Councillor Webb's turn. He's waited very patiently for you.
The overall budget doesn't mean to say that how it's how he's going to deal with the savings he needs to make here.
That really, I mean, that is Councillor Banwait's problem, but that is his answer. He only has to answer the question. You don't have to like his answer. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. The Part F of the call-in refers to the paper fails to identify a range of options. There are only 2 options considered. How many were put before the Cabinet report finally went to Cabinet?
Councillor Banwait.
Chair, I've kind of answered it earlier on that the onus is on us as the administration. It was our manifesto commitment. This is something we wanted to do. We have got a mandate to do it. We've tried to maintain the structure of neighbourhood working and I use the phrase collapsing bag, but to cut our cloth accordingly, to make sure that the integrity of the service was maintained, in priority areas, within the resources we've got left, Chair. So it was that option. So in other words, it was maintaining the policy that we'd launched, the policy which I led on as Cabinet member in 2012-13, or cutting it completely, Chair. Now, no doubt, there could be other options that they might, in the past, previous administrations, and I think when the Conservatives were in power, they made cuts and I
think we've answered it. Thank you, Councillor.
But Chair, I'm sure there's probably, all sorts of scenarios they could do, but they're not scenarios that we would have wished to have considered, Chair. Thank you.
And I mean, the fact that a range of options considered, a range can be absolutely anything, an upper and a lower limit. So saying there aren't enough to make a range, 2 is a range. Councillor Dinser. Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for coming tonight, Councillor Banwait. On the issue of proportionality, you mentioned before in your answer about proportionality that the resources, and note I'm not using funding, as being cut throughout across the board. What I'd like to ask there then is how will the proportionality of that be measured in terms of if, and I'm using as simple as an example I can, if there is a pothole in a certain ward that is not deemed a priority by the council, but the ward members and members of the community of that ward have said this is a real issue for us, how is it going to be measured in terms of where it will come in the priority of it being dealt with, and how will that funding be recorded so that the proportionality of funding, resources across the city will be proportionate rather than into those set priority wards? Because from my experience when we're using the multiple indices record, which was under the old NRF, which I'm sure those of you that were around back then, 2000, 2002 time, the ward's very similar, but that didn't change. And one of the big reasons that you've said here is in the second paragraph, 4.1, is to develop and strengthen communities and to facilitate the residents and community groups to be more proactive to do things themselves. So I just want to make sure that in terms of proportionality, you said it would be measured by the officers, but how will that be measured? Because in the past, when we have asked questions about where resources have been spent throughout the wards and asked for a breakdown of the spend, we have been told that we couldn't have that breakdown because it would be too much. And I know under this, the past, we were able to see, we had our own little pots and we had our own little funds, so we were able to see it quite succinctly and clearly. This is going to sort of split it up a bit. So if you could just let me have a bit more assurance over the proportionality aspect there.
Chair, I'm just looking at the definition of proportionality. In mathematics terms, it's, and I quote, having the same or a constant ratio. So neighbourhood funding, I come back to the point again, there's devolved funding will not exist for any ward. I don't know any context where any ward, and certainly I've got no experience of using devolved funding to fill potholes as an example. I mean, obviously that's a statutory requirement. If there's a pothole that meets, you know, the what's it called, the criteria, what's it called, the intervention levels, they legally have to be filled. That's not about, you know, there's a legal requirement. We have an insurance that we have to. You know, if we don't fill that pothole, and it makes a difference if it's in Alistry, well, if you let me finish, well. If you're not, again, it's, if you don't, let me, okay, right. Let me just, Chair, let me just finish. So the pothole analogy just simply doesn't work. And I come back to the point, devolved funding will not exist across the city. In terms of proportionality about the work that the officers would do, that's the closest understanding I can have in terms of the type, you know, the points that we're making. Again, that's not, that will be issue driven. You know, that's not to simply, you know, you can't just invent those issues. If there are issues of the nature of, you know, community around community cohesion, crime and antisocial behaviour, community safety, that warrant that support, and we've got councillors clearly with a great deal of experience to understand what those type of issues would be, then that support would be made available, Chair. You know, but in terms of kind of day-to-day where there's potholes issues, well, we have, you know, a central highways maintenance budget, although it's not a great deal, but, you know, clearly that is proportionate because that's based upon a legal requirement that we need to, you know, repair potholes that meet clear intervention levels. Chair, thank you.
I think the point was, Councillor Williams, is that it's not the funding, it's like...
I understand that. It's the neighbourhood working. Yeah, I understand that.
I'm sorry, I don't know what your neighbourhood managers do, but I've never seen mine fixing a pothole.
No. I perhaps used that as a wrong analogy. That's what I was coming to say. It wasn't the best example. Thank you. So again, you still didn't answer my question. In terms of proportionality, how are we going to measure across the wards that call on resource is met?
Chair, I've answered that.
Okay, if that's your answer, that's your answer.
Neighbourhood officers, there is proportionality. You know, we've introduced neighbourhood officers based upon the indices of multiple deprivation, Chair. And that's how we've come to that allocation, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Banwaite. Any further questions? Councillor Potter.
Chair, before we move on, can I just seek some legal advice on a particular point? At some point.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. I wanted to be clear that where a policy identifies a particular saving in relation to a reduction in staff, and I think it's 109, I can't remember how much it is now, top of my head, 197,000 is it in terms of staff savings, whatever. But where the policy identifies a monetary saving in terms of reduction of staff, but it's acknowledged that that saving cannot be made, is it a proper policy? Is it right to agree a policy that you know you cannot achieve in legal terms?
Thank you. Chair, that's not technically a legal issue. The issue around finances is for the Section 151. The Section 151 has a professional and personal responsibility to ensure that the budget is set. And in this decision, the Section 151 officer has to be satisfied that it's a budget pressure which can be managed within the balanced budget that we've got. So it's not technically a legal question, it's more of a finance question. The Section 151 officer could not have authorised this decision if he wasn't satisfied that the pressure couldn't be met within the balanced budget arrangement that the Leader of the Council has already alluded to.
I hear that, Chair, but at the time the Section 151 officer would have considered it. It's not now. He's not considering it now, and now's the point that it's known that we can't make that saving. So how do we get the clarification from the Section 151 officer that he can agree this saving?
Chair, I am satisfied that at the time that this report was placed before Cabinet, the Section 151 officer had full sight of it and had given his opinion at that time. As you may be aware, the Council has quite a rigorous sign-off and checklist process to go through before all reports get to Cabinet, and that both myself and the Section 151 officer have to review all of the reports before they're published. The decision about the funding is not for this committee. The Section 151 gives his advice to Cabinet at the time they're considering the report, and I'm satisfied that he did that. He has considered the full facts because I'm satisfied that they're currently contained within this document, and the outstanding information, which is not here, was actually dealt with by Cabinet and full Council during the budget setting process and during the budget consultation process which took place earlier this year, both December, last year and earlier this year. So I'm satisfied that there has been sufficient information available for the Cabinet to make a safe legal and financial decision in this matter.
Just for complete clarity then, at what point will the Section 151 officer have considered the fact that the staffing savings cannot be achieved?
As I've already, I think, said that, Chair, the Section 151 officer considered this report prior to its publication, and as did I, from a legal perspective. There is a sign-off process that goes for every Cabinet report prior to publication to ensure that the decisions that Cabinet are being asked to make are lawful and they're financially sustainable for the Council. In the event that either of those options are not met, then both of us have a professional responsibility to report our advice to the Cabinet and give advice, be it in support of or going against the decisions that the Cabinet has been asked to make. And we both have a professional responsibility to do that in a transparent manner.
Harjul.
Yeah, I think Councillor Porter should be experienced to know that budgets, once they're set, don't always go according to plan, and there are changes that happen, and that's got to be taken into account. At the end of the day, officers and the Cabinet will balance the budget at the end of the year. No budget decisions made at the beginning stay as they are because there's variation. So this
thank you, Councillor Dins. I think we're straying away from the call-in ever so slightly. Barbara, did you have a question?
This question that Chris Porter is asking doesn't bear any relevance because there will be changes or delays in budgets.
Yeah.
And they do get changed.
There's always the ability to achieve a saving as well. Let's get past this. Councillor Jackson.
Am I allowed to make a comment instead of ask a question?
Not at this stage, at the end.
Oh, please.
No. No, Barbara, sorry.
Well,
I know, but...
Well, I just wonder what criteria the Conservative government used of proportionality when they allocated 300 million to Conservative councils and none to hard-pressed Labour councils north of Watford.
Friday night's all right for fighting. We shall now move on. We'll have a summing up, 5 minutes. Have you chosen your champion?
Yeah.
It's Frank. That's what I like to hear.
Okay. Well,
wait. I've got to time you. I've got to time you,
I
Frank.
know that politics won't come into this debate, but obviously that's not the case, and what a shame, isn't it? Right, okay.
I'm never disappointed.
I am disappointed, because I have not used politics, although I could have done, and I won't. Right, Chair, thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. Banwaite for his, what he's put into this contribution tonight. However, Mr Van Waite, the residents of Oakwood had no consultation whatsoever about this. So how you can say we consulted with the public is just not on at all. And I think the same applies to other parts of the city as well. You might have consulted with certain parts, but you didn't consult with certain parts that I'm aware of. And you say that the decisions were taken on deprivation. Well, I can tell you, Councillor Van Waite, that in my ward, the deprivation in a certain part is lower than what you have put into being. It's 20%. I think that deserves on its own a neighbourhood officer. And in any case, you stated that the neighbourhood officers would work day one in Bolton and Ulverston and day two somewhere else, but Wednesday, Thursday and Friday they will be the whole of the city. Well, why not make Wednesday for a certain other part of the city, I haven't got a neighbourhood officer, and Thursday for another part, and then just leave Friday for them to deal with the rest of the city? I accept the fact, Mr Chair, that devolved funding has been completely taken away from the whole of the city. I accept that. But I cannot accept that what has happened has been fair, thought through, and in my case, it is not fair to those residents of those wards that haven't got anything at all. Let's be honest and fair. I accept the fact, if it had come to my neighbourhood board and forum, and they'd agreed with what you'd done, then I'd hold my hands up and say, fine. But they weren't given the opportunity. The councillors in my ward weren't given the opportunity. The councillors in the other wards that have got nobody weren't given the opportunity. And when we asked questions, even our neighbourhood manager wasn't aware what was going on. Now that's not fair. You haven't been fair. And in my opinion, this decision you have taken is therefore completely flawed, and I think you ought to take a look at it and at least ensure that every ward in this city, no matter what ward it is treated the same, and that they have an opportunity of having somebody they could go to individually whatever day. I don't mind if I would get it on Thursday and Elvis get it Monday. I'm not bothered, but all I want is fairness. This is not fair. It's time it was, and I want you to go back and think on it and make it fair.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Councillor Banway, you have 5 minutes. 5 minutes is the maximum.
Chair, shall be quick. I reject the basis of this calling, Chair. We believe it is proportionate for the reasons I pointed out earlier on. We've been clear about the aims and the desired outcomes. We have consulted, Chair, for the reasons I've given earlier on, and we have explored alternatives, Chair. So, you know, we think this is a sound decision, and we wish to progress with it because, the reality is this call-in has actually obviously stopped that process, and in fact it kind of contradicts the arguments being put. It actually creates the pressure. So, you know, we just want to now get on with it so those communities can start to benefit. In fact, all the communities across the city can start to benefit for the reasons I've outlined earlier on, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, now what we'll do is we'll go board... Oh, sorry, I'll stop that. Oh, yeah, everyone gets 5 minutes then. It's a maximum of 5 minutes for ourselves as well, but I really don't think we'll take 5 minutes. I'll ask each board member in turn. Do we have to do it in any particular order? No. No? Okay. I'll do front row first. To just give us a reason whether they will be recommend that we uphold the call-in or reject the call-in, and if you could give us your reasoning, that'd be great. Councillor Williams, if you would like to go first.
Thank you. I believe this has been breached under the principles of A, proportionality, and E, the clarity of aims and desired outcomes.
Thank you. Sorry, you just push a button. Councillor Webb.
I'm also saying that the breach has been on proportionality, and with regard to proportionality, it needs to be seen to be fair and clear across the whole of the city. The due consultation, I do take Councillor Harwood's point about due consultation and the fact that members of the public and board and forum members were not given the opportunity to comment on these proposals, but it is clear that during the budget process this was mentioned. Clarity of aims and objectives, I think that this needs to be upheld as far as the call-in is concerned. We've heard from Councillor Banwaite tonight that what's in the paper isn't exactly how he sees this to be working on a day-to-day basis. And I do again take Councillor Harwood's point that an allocation of officers across the city, maybe 4 days a week, and as fifth day he's said that they can collectively deal with items across the city, I think that that would be a fairer way, but there is no clarity in the report, and so therefore I think the report fails, and I would uphold the call-in on that. And finally, on the any other relevant issues, I'm still not convinced about the savings that are to be made on this with regard to personnel, and that would create a pressure in the future. So I think that, again, I would uphold that point.
Councillor Khan. Councillor Jackson.
Yes, I would also like to reject this. You won't be surprised to know. Looking at the 5 principles and listen to what Councillor Banwaite has said by way of explanation, certainly I think proportionality is not a matter that has been dismissed. It's been dealt with very adequately. So I do not support the call-in.
Councillor Whitney.
Thank you, Chair. Well, did we know this was coming? Were we consulted? Well, yes, I was at a public residents meeting, I can't remember when it was, discussing this very issue, and the public were very sympathetic, to be honest, about the plight we were in. So I know we've consulted on this. Proportionality, it's depressingly proportionate. I mean, we all lose pretty much everything, and if we don't lose it now, we lose it soon. You can't be fairer than that, to be honest. Clarity of aims, we need to make the savings. I'm happier now that Councillor Banwaite has clarified that your Oakwoods and Chellerstons of this world can get some resource. I mean, I think it is right that they can call on those things, and they clearly can. And other options considerable, we did consider other options. That's not in dispute. So for me, there is no, the call-in fails. Thank you.
Councillor Dinser.
Yep. I reject and call in on the basis that in terms of proportionality, funding is withdrawn from all wards. There is a facility in here highlighted by Councillor Banwaite on page 4 that all wards can make claim on the resources, and the formula used based on need will be applied by the officers. In terms of the relevant other issue, I just don't think that stacks up, because budgets are what they are when they are set. They do change as the process goes along. There are delays in certain bits. brought forward others. That's what has to be managed by the cabinet and the officers. So, in terms of the whole of the call-in, I think it is unfortunate. There are cuts, but there are cuts which are causing difficulties across the piece, and whatever we've got left is being used as well as it can be, in as proportional way as it can be. Thank you.
Councillor Poulter.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of proportionality, I think I would upheld the application in that it's clearly disproportionate, the effect of total removal of all funding in relation to the value of it and engaging with the public. But moreover, it's clear, and it's been admitted and accepted, a disproportionality in that certain wards will not have the resources and support needed to operate a forum, a neighbourhood board in their ward, as the other wards in the city will have. So it must be it therefore must be disproportionate. In terms of consultation, you've heard my argument in that the budget consultation was insufficient detail. Nobody's consulted with anybody in the community about the withdrawal or total withdrawal of funding or total withdrawal of officer support. So that's upheld as well. In terms of clarity of aims, there are major gaps for those wards where there is no support in terms of how resolution of issues will be carried out. There are gaps in the way that members can find means to resolve things already, and the removal of a neighbourhood officer resource will add to that completely. And finally, in relation to other relevant issues, I believe that at the very least, the report should, when agreed by Cabinet, as it seems it is going to be, should identify the true saving that can be made in terms of the full-time equivalent posts as a result of this policy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the issues raised, in terms of proportionality, I mean, the deprivation index is the basic building block of that, and therefore it was proportional to make the decision that we took. And therefore there's no reason at that point to call in. In terms of due consultation, I think the consultation itself was particularly weak on the issues of the actual outcome after the budget was consulted upon. The actual outcome in terms of the final form of this report was weak. There was little consultation with the backbench councillors and little or no consultation with the forum and the boards. Some officers didn't know, but the question is there sufficient consultation within the document relating to the start of the process, which is the budget? And there is, and therefore it won't fail the test there, so therefore there is no reason to call it in. In terms of clarity of aims and desired outcomes, I think it's pretty certain when you look back at the budget, the reason for doing it was clear, and the outcomes were clear, so therefore again there is no reason to call it in on that point. In the record of options, I think there is some weakness there, and it should have been better in regard to the options that were discussed, but the question we were asked in terms of the calling procedures, are there options available? And there are, and therefore it does pass that test, and therefore there is again no reason on that point to call it in. And on the final point regarding the budget, the issue there is how you manage your budget pressure. That is, as Janie has said, is down to the Section 151 officer, and will be result in them taking further reports to Cabinet over the ensuing financial year. So therefore, again, there is no reason to call it in. Thank you, Chair.
So that is the call-in rejected. I will say this report didn't actually come to this scrutiny board as it was a late item introduced to the Cabinet meeting. So I will thank the proposers of the call-in for giving this board our always colourful opportunity to discuss these things and giving us that additional opportunity for this to have that additional level of scrutiny. Thank you very much for your time. If you ever have free time on a Friday night again and you want to repeat this process, I'm all yours. Thank you.